The Vauxhall Astra has become one of Britain's most common cars and something of a British point of pride, being produced in the Ellesmere Port factory in Cheshire. But rather than being more British than Bubble and Squeak, the first Astra marked the start of a German dominance in the Vauxhall-Opel partnership, and every one of the 8 revisions would be designed outside the UK. But the car and the Astra name would become a British export success story. So how has the Astra fared since it launched in 1979, and what's next? This is the Vauxhall Opel Saturn Holden Chevrolet Astra story. Opel, General Motors' German subsidiary, had been producing cars called the Kadett since before the war. After the war, the Soviets claimed what was left of the tooling from the bombed-out factory and had a factory built in Russia producing it as the Moskvich 400 and 420. Opel was reborn as a purely West German company, giving owners GM complete control, and a new Kadett appeared in 1962. It was updated in 1965 and 1973 and was considered so good it would be used as the basis for GM's New World Car T platform, a reaction to the 1973 oil crisis. The T platform would be used all around the world as the Australian Holden Gemini, the American Chevrolet Chevette and the British Vauxhall Chevette. Opel was charged with a new version of the T platform, this time focused on a new competitor. In 1974, Volkswagen launched the front-wheel drive Golf, and soon General Motors engineering teams in the USA and West Germany were rushing to emulate a superior car. The year the Golf launched, Opel laid out the mechanicals of the new Kadett, and soon they were testing it on the open road. To show just how much their focus was on their rivals, the chassis would be disguised by using Fiat 127 and Volkswagen Golf bodies, with interesting bonnet changes to make the Opel engine fit. By 1976, the dimensions of the new car were set, just slightly bigger than the Golf, to give it better interior and boot space. Entry-level engines would come from the existing Kadett, but the larger engines and manual gearbox would be all new, coming from a development program in GM's Brazilian operation. The goal was to make this a good all-round engine that could be used for many cars in GM cars all around the world. Suspension would be a modern setup with similar rear setup to Volkswagen's new Polo. There would be modern disc brakes up front with drums at the back. Opel's boxy design hid improved crash structures over the older car, and despite its sharp edges it had a lower drag factor, although nothing like the slippery shapes that would emerge in the 80s. It was shorter than the older car, but with front-wheel drive and a longer wheelbase it was bigger on the inside. Over in the UK, Vauxhall saw this as a replacement not just of the Chevette, but their ageing Viva. Their design department got to work creating a Vauxhall restyle with the by now trademark droop snout nose as they'd done with the Cavalier. With this replacing the booted Viva, and with 70s Brits loving saloons, a 3-box version was designed along with an estate and even a hot mid-engined hatch. The work on the saloon wouldn't get very far though, as GM cancelled it early on due to costs. The expense of producing a brand new front-wheel drive chassis was driving the new Kadett's budget sky high, but GM felt this was money well spent. They needed something to take on the front-wheel drive threat of the Golf. When the Vauxhall design was completed, it looked about what you'd expect, like the love child between the final Opel Kadett and the 1975 Vauxhall Cavalier hatchback. This initial design would go through a process of cost-cutting, getting a similar look using off-the-shelf parts such as Vauxhall Carlton indicators and Opel Kadett headlights mounted at an angle. The car's interior was headed up by Opel, but Vauxhall would help soften the design around the edges, especially on the higher trim levels. In an age where designers were discovering the importance of ergonomics, the dashboard mimicked the Golf by putting controls and information up high to reduce driver distraction. Vauxhall were reticent to use the Chevette name, but the Vauxhall Kadett didn't sound very British. Much better therefore to plump for the Latin word astra, meaning stars. But as 1979 dawned and Vauxhall continued to prepare their version of the Kadett, the axe fell on the last remnants of Vauxhall's design department, and with it the Vauxhall changes. The new Astra would look identical to the European Kadett. But there was sound logic to doing this. Why incur the extra expense of different versions across the EEC when other European car companies were proving it wasn't necessary? But it was a sad day for Vauxhall, reducing it to vehicle production and a marketing department. The new Astra would be produced in the UK, but not for 2 years. This had trade unions spooked, thinking it was a precursor to moving jobs abroad. They had good reason to be worried. GM were clearly tired of the constant trade union action. Just months before the announcement Astra production would be delayed, trades unions had caused a damaging 9-week strike, right at the time GM needed as many cars as they could sell. With Britain in the common market, making European imports suddenly much cheaper, you would think this would put GM in a great bargaining position. All they needed to do was ramp up European production and close British factories, putting their sick English patient out of its misery. But Vauxhall was British. Without British production, would British sales falter, just as it was picking up after years of malaise? So an agreement was found. Luton production was assured, and British production of the Astra would start in 2 years' time at Ellesmere Port, down the road from Chester. Until then, the Vauxhall Astra would be made on the continent. With an unsympathetic Conservative government now in power, unions would have to take GM's word it would happen. With a fresh union deal in their hands, the Vauxhall Astra was hurriedly launched without any clue of a price at the Scottish Motor Show, importantly getting a jump on Ford's new Mark III Escort. Just one hatchback and a state model were on offer, and the lack of publicity and an eventual high price showed that GM wasn't actually that keen on selling them in Britain right away. Sales of the Kadett had taken off in Europe, leaving few cars for British dealers, and GM was keen to keep Brits buying Chevettes to keep British production ticking over until Astra production could start. A couple of high-end Astras at high prices would be enough to whet British appetites and give the car an exclusive quality, especially as Europeans seemed to think this was a well put together car. British reviewers agreed, with What Car naming it their Car of the Year for 1980. With Ford's third generation Escort launching at the October 1980 Birmingham Motor Show, Vauxhall needed something to talk about. They launched new trim levels and a new saloon version that was technically a saloon, but it was a bit hard to spot. It had the visual look of a hatchback that put off saloon customers while having a more impractical rear opening. Predictably, most people ignored it both sides of the English Channel. Despite the promise of a fuller range, the cars on show were rebadged Kadetts, and supply problems would rob Vauxhall dealers of stock to sell its customers. The Astra was cool, but you couldn't buy one yet. Instead of settling for a Chevette, customers just went down the road to test drive an Escort. If they could fix their supply problems, Vauxhall had the start of a compelling lineup, especially for fleet customers, and finally something they could play off against Ford, especially when the Bedford Astra van arrived in 1982. With production issues finally resolved, what Vauxhall needed was better marketing. They got it with a new boss, straight-talking Australian John Bagshaw. With a sales background and fresh from a senior marketing position at Pontiac in the USA, one of his first jobs was replacing Vauxhall's marketing head. But he had another problem. Due to historical reasons, Opel sold cars in the UK and the continent, as did Vauxhall. This worked well when Opel and Vauxhall produced separate vehicles, but it now meant Opel dealers in the UK were selling the Kadett in competition with Vauxhall dealers. GM had stopped Vauxhall's European sales because, well, they didn't have anything unique to offer. Unlike Jif would become Sif, the UK Opel team was expecting the Vauxhall name to disappear. But to the surprise of many British Vauxhall and Opel staff, John Bagshaw announced that both operations would be merged under the new Vauxhall Opel brand, which would eventually be shortened to just Vauxhall. The brand, established in the 1850s, would live on. As the Astra was joined by the larger Mark II Cavalier, hewn from Astra Mechanicals to save costs, British customers found that Vauxhall was selling really rather good cars. UK production ramped up to supply demand. automatic gearboxes and diesel engines appeared. Ford's Sierra mishap only helped Vauxhall's cause, and soon more and more people were giving Vauxhall another look and liking what they saw. Sales of the Astra bloomed, spurred mainly by the hatchback. The marketing men focused on the Astra's Germanic technical prowess years before Audi started proclaiming Vorsprung durch Technik. The mechanicals were good, but they weren't exactly long-lasting. GM were, after all, selling a car for a price. The part only had to be good enough, not over-engineered, and if it were, it would cost more. The Astra was reasonably priced, and those reliable mechanical bits were cheap to maintain, which further reduced the total cost of ownership. Music to fleet managers' ears. For example, it would take a trained service technician just half an hour to replace the clutch. GM's sell the right package at the right price model in the US had come to Europe. By 1982, those weird saloon versions had been discontinued, and Opel had started working on the next generation Astra. But the Mark I Astra had more to come in the form of the SR, aimed squarely at Volkswagen's Golf GTI and Ford's Escort XR3i. It got a 1.6 litre engine plus a 5-speed manual with a fifth gear that was more than just for motorway cruising. The fuel-injected GTE arrived the following year, but Vauxhall was still selling its cars on fuel economy rather than performance, and most performance customers, at least in 1982, looked elsewhere. The Mark II update made only small mechanical changes. The focus was on updating the body and the interior. GM's eyes were still on the Volkswagen Golf. With an updated design expected, GM felt their car needed a radical change. It became more rounded, using lessons learnt from their recent Tech 1 concept. This new rounded, slippery design was the latest trend in the auto industry, with the Audi 100, Ford Sierra and Volvo 700 series appearing. Okay, maybe not the last one. Computer-aided design was used for the first time, allowing the body to be stiffer yet lighter, using less material that made it cheaper. The aerodynamic shape not only made the car faster while using less fuel, but reduced wind noise and made it more stable in crosswinds. With the extensive use of a wind tunnel, Opel could design the airflow so the minimum amount of dirt and mud would be thrown back onto the rear of the car. Inside there was a complete update, and GM made sure there would be more room. The dashboard took on an ergonomic layout that hasn't changed much since. Bigger doors made it easier to get in and out, and the team took pains to remove every squeak and rattle from the body and interior. Overall, it was a more refined package, and hopefully a Volkswagen Golf beater. The car remained easy to maintain thanks to its Family 1 and Family 2 engines retained from the old car, now used on the larger Cavalier. GM also designed the body to be more easily repairable with innovative welding techniques that made panels easier to remove, and replacement wings and rear sections were readily available. As for manufacturing, robots invaded the Ellesmere Port factory to take some of those union jobs, something that was happening to car factories across the globe and helped to speed up production and make cars less expensive. The new car launched in August 1984 and took Vauxhall to the next level. With the smaller Nova, they had a full fleet to rival Ford, and the new Astra and Cavalier cemented Vauxhall as the country's #2 car producer, with fleets buying them in large numbers. By the end of the 80s, the Astra and Cavalier seemed to be parked at the side of every road in Britain. The regular Astra had improved aerodynamics, but the Performance GTE model took it to the next level with a drag of just 0.3. The large rear spoiler added more top speed that even improved fuel efficiency, but its main job was improving rear stability. To add to the exclusivity, the GTE got a digital dashboard. The 1.8 litre engine was quickly updated to a 2 litre, delivering 124 horsepower to take the fight to the burgeoning hot hatch market. While Volkswagen had the Jetta and Ford the Orion, Vauxhall didn't have an Astra saloon. That changed in 1986 with the Belmont. This was especially helpful to Vauxhall, as saloons had long been popular in the UK. It helped to fill out both Vauxhall and Opel's range, and blossoming sales allowed them to finance it. But giving the booted Astra a different name confused the marketing message. Vauxhall tried calling it the Astra Belmont, but when the new Astra generation arrived, the Belmont name had been dropped, and Ford would give up on the Orion name in 1993. All mainstream cars were losing their heads in the 1980s, and the Astra was no exception. The Astra convertible wasn't the most elegant conversion, born out of the fact that designers hadn't considered a cabriolet during development, and the extra work involved to produce it showed in the higher price. But despite an awkward rollover hoop and having to put the roof up manually, it gave the Astra some pizzazz, especially in hot GTE form. Talking of the GTE, in 1988 it became the GTE 16 valve. Adding more inlet valves became a potent way to increase the performance, and having the letters 1, 6 and V on the back of your car was the latest upwardly mobile status symbol. The work on the engine turned the GTE 16 valve into a 156 horsepower pocket rocket, with 60 miles an hour arriving in just 7 seconds. That's a wild ride for the 1980s and was on the top of every company rep's list for their next car. With the Astra, Escort and Rover 200 in a three-way battle for British supremacy, and the Astra getting the bronze medal, the third generation Astra arrived in 1991. Over in Europe, the car was renamed the Opel Astra, likely to homogenise the whole range around car names ending in the letter A. With recent concern about the environment, Vauxhall and Opel were keen to emphasise the new car's ecological credibility. It got a catalytic converter, and more parts were made from recyclable materials. Despite Opel's advertising claiming the name change meant big changes in the car, it was again an evolution from the previous generation Kadett. It got a new shape and interior, of course, with the same hatchback, saloon, estate and cabriolet versions. In the 70s and 80s, safety features were more of an afterthought, but Volvo proved that having a car that seemed safer than all others was a key selling point. The new Astra would get side impact bars, a better safety cell and seatbelt pre-tensioners, and eventually airbags. A small update came in 1994 with the distinctive V-grille and new Ecotec versions of the existing engines designed to reduce emissions. It also got better rust proofing to prevent rust that had been causing recall problems. Sensing a hit, GM would sell the Astra in more parts of the world. It was already available in South Africa and would now be assembled in India and Indonesia. In Brazil it was sold as the Chevrolet Astra until the Brazilian government effectively banned it by upping the import duty from 20% to 70%. It would be offered for the first time in Australia and New Zealand, imported from Europe, replacing the existing Holden Astra that was a rebadged Nissan Pulsar. Vauxhall sold 4 million Astras between 1991 and 1998, but customers were starting to look at MPV competitions such as the Renault Scenic and luxury competition like the Audi A3. The Astra had sold well, but it was becoming about as common as a pile of muck in a muck superstore. Vauxhall would have their own MPV soon enough in the shape of the Zafira, built of course on the Astra platform, but parent GM had nothing to combat the badge snobbery of Audi's A3. The Astra had always been in the top 10 and continued to sell well for now, but it was always in second place to Ford's mid-size car. Other than another style update, the new Astra focused on two aspects: handling and safety. Previous Astras had been praised for their handling, but they now lagged the competition, so Lotus was brought in to turn the car into a class leader. And with Euro NCAP safety ratings becoming an increasingly important selling point, GM made sure the new Astra did well. To quash any worries about rust, the body was the first Opel to be fully galvanised. Vauxhall gave its Astra van a sporty makeover, even though it still sported a diesel engine, with the Sportive in 1999. But the Halo model, launched a year later, was the Astra Coupe. Bertone had been converting Astras into convertibles for years, and GM asked them to make a coupe as mid-size coupes were proliferating at the turn of the millennium, and GM needed something for Vauxhall Calibra customers as that car had been discontinued. With the turbo, it was a potent beast that could be thoroughly customised with all types of modern conveniences. But the coupe fad didn't last long, and it would be succeeded by the Astra Sport Hatch. The Astra had been produced at Ellesmere Port in Britain for 20 years by now, but like many car companies, GM was starting to produce its cars in nations such as Poland and Egypt, where workers were paid much less. German production would end in 2005, but the staff at Ellesmere Port demonstrated their commitment to producing a car as efficiently as possible, and production remained. GM forged a joint development agreement with AutoVAZ, makers of the Lada Riva, to produce the Astra in Russia in 2004 as a Chevrolet Viva. The factory was refitted at a cost of £250 million. All that expense, though, had to be repaid somehow, and both companies completely misjudged the market. The car was far too expensive, and only about 1,000 were sold every year before both companies pulled the plug 4 years later. As aerodynamicists found the optimal low-drag shape of a mid-size car, changes in design got smaller and smaller, so the new 2004 Astra looked fairly similar to the 1998 Astra, but underneath it used GM's all-new Delta platform, again shared with the Zafira, but also shared with America's Saturn Ion, Chevy Cobalt, Pontiac G5, and the retro-styled Chevy HHR. The new chassis meant it was 14 centimeters longer than the old car, giving increased interior space. It was so big it replaced the Chevrolet Vectra in Brazil, essentially a Vauxhall Vectra, so the Vauxhall Astra in Brazil was surprisingly called the Chevrolet Vectra. By now, the main focus was on the hatchback and the estate, with the saloon mainly sold in markets that favoured it, such as Eastern Europe, Turkey and South America. The 1980s had been a time of extreme hot hatches, leading to a spate of joyriding that curbed car makers' desire to sell loud, extreme cars that could be seen as fueling this antisocial behaviour. But by the noughties, they felt safe enough to push faster and faster halo models to sell their regular cars. So the Astra VXR appeared in 2005, known as the OPC on the continent. The 2-litre turbocharged engine got the car to 60 in just 6 seconds and onwards to over 150 miles an hour, becoming the pin-up on many a teenager's bedroom wall. That power was prodigious, but too much for the poor chassis that couldn't keep up. The car was a brute on the track, but you wouldn't notice it on your way home from work. A special Nürburgring edition in 2008 gave a little extra power and made some improvements to the handling to try to contain all that power. The Cabriolet got an automatic retractable hardtop overhaul that many cars of the period were getting, turning the Astra into the best of both worlds, a capable coupe when it's wet and, at the touch of a button, an elegant open top when it's sunny. GM imported the mechanism to North America, showing up on the Pontiac G6. An interesting option was the panoramic windscreen that to the driver felt like open-top driving without the rain, as their peripheral vision could only see glass. A handy sunshade could be pulled forward to block out the sunshine. These special additions helped the Astra shrug off the competition, but it continued to be the bridesmaid to the Ford Focus's bride. The USA had used the Astra platform in 2004, but it got the whole package in 2007 when GM's funky offshoot Saturn launched the Saturn Astra. Saturn had started off as a new kind of car company. They weren't based in Detroit. They used a brand new design built using dent-resistant polymer body panels, and dealerships featured no haggle pricing, meaning a much simpler and relaxed buying experience. But by 2007, many of the things that made Saturn Saturn had been abandoned. It was just another GM sub-brand. Saturn Astra sales weren't good, while there were still unsold Saturn Ions, and worries about their future now that GM had gone bankrupt didn't help. Sales ended in 2010, but cars derived from the Astra would continue when the Buick Verano launched in 2011 based on the next generation Astra platform. The Buick name was weirdly enough popular in China, with many leaders in pre-communist days choosing Buicks, so the Astra-based Verano would be sold and built there. Astra sales were being challenged by crossovers and more premium models, but they were still respectable, with the 2004 Astra selling over 2.7 million cars before the next generation model arrived in 2009. This would take its styling cues from the Vauxhall Opel Insignia, the replacement for the Vectra. The engines were still evolutions from the original Mark I Astra engine introduced way back in 1979, although the larger engines had been substantially re-engineered as Ecotec branded versions around 2000. 5-speed gearboxes made way for optional 6 speeds. The new Delta II platform replaced the old Delta platform. This was more of an evolution. Why not, when so many people had enjoyed the old Astra? It was a little better equipped, a little safer, a little quicker, a little bigger. But maybe that size increase persuaded more customers to take a look at Ford and Vauxhall's smaller models. The Focus was finally beaten in sales by the Fiesta and the Astra by the Corsa. There's only so much space a family needs, I suppose, and if they can get it in a cheaper car, they will. New EcoFlex diesels were available, which promised fewer emissions with greater fuel economy, although as Vauxhall Opel were also caught cheating in the diesel emissions scandal of 2015, these figures should probably be taken with a huge grain of salt. Maybe because the Astra had kept growing for 6 generations and customers were favouring smaller cars, the 7th generation Astra in 2015 shrank both in size and weight. Despite being smaller on the outside, Vauxhall and Opel insisted it was bigger on the inside, like a 4-wheeled TARDIS, but without all that wibbly-wobbly time travel stuff. It again used a new chassis, and this was where much of the weight savings came from, as Opel inspected every component with a fine-toothed comb. Engines were finally also new across the range and included a 3-cylinder for the first time. Efficiency increased on both gasoline and diesel engines. The Astra kept getting more modern conveniences, and the new car got everything from lane keep assistance to ventilated massaging chairs. The Astra got GM's OnStar Concierge feature, born almost 20 years earlier to allow customers to phone a live operator to get directions, to book a hotel, but also for calling emergency services in the event of an accident or to track a stolen car. Despite the promise, the take-up rate wasn't high. The reliance on live operators in the early days made it expensive, especially as GM had to pay for the hardware to be pre-installed into every car. Ford's Sync system was a more automated reaction to OnStar. Where previous Astras had been sold as saloons, coupes and cabriolets, the new car would only be sold as a hatchback and an estate, consolidating the lineup to only those models that sold well. Customers could still buy the old Astra Saloon, but it was the previous generation car. Offering fewer models was likely because of lower demand, and despite making the car smaller, customers were still buying even smaller cars or larger crossovers like Nissan's Qashqai. Sales were dealt another blow in 2017 when General Motors announced the sale of Vauxhall and Opel to PSA, owners of the Peugeot and Citroën brands. Sales of the Opel Astra had been falling for years, and Vauxhall branded models in the UK didn't fare much better. Outside of the Buick version in China, Astra production was down to just 2 locations, Poland and Ellesmere Port, that had been producing it since 1981 when GM had done that deal with the truculent British unions. In 2021, Astra production would move from Poland to Germany, but production would remain at Ellesmere Port despite worries over the effects of Brexit, and the factory celebrated production of its 4 millionth car in 2017. The 8th generation Astra arrived in 2021, the first under PSA's ownership, renamed Stellantis now that they'd bought Fiat Chrysler. The car had a striking new look underlying the new ownership. When PSA purchased Vauxhall Opel, they announced that all cars would start using PSA platforms and bodies. The new Astra will be built on the EMP2 platform used by this raft of Stellantis, Chinese and Toyota cars. The engine lineup was simplified to just 3 engines, a 1.2 litre 3-cylinder, a 1.6 litre 4-cylinder and a 1.5 litre diesel, and a sports tourer version was promised upon its launch, presumably with a suitably lively engine. Hybrids and plug-in hybrids would be available for the first time, something long overdue, and Vauxhall jumped on the EV bandwagon with the Astra E fully electric car. For the first time, the Astra would get an all-digital dashboard, plus a heads-up display and more automated driver's aids. It's a new start for a car that's been a common sight for more than 40 years, but the Astra and Vauxhall has an uncertain future with new owners and declining sales. But with a car that can trace its lineage back to the Opel Kadett in 1962, it's a rich history that few cars can hope to equal. This was quite a long video, but if you want to watch a quick video where I talk a little bit more about the Astra and give some of my opinion, click on the optional extra video on the right. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.